Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to day 2 of Community Week at the Internet Society. We're very thrilled to have you here. You're at the Internet Way of Networking session on day 2. I'm Neeti. I'm going to be your moderator for today. I work with the Internet Society as Policy and Advocacy Manager. I'm joined by Amrita Choudhury, who is, of the very many hats that she wears, is the president of the ISOC Delhi chapter. A few housekeeping rules to remind you of before we jump into the Internet Way of Networking session is that we are on social media. We have a hashtag. It's Community Week 21. Please do tweet at us and feel free to join in the banter that's happening on social media around Community Week. There's interpretation into Spanish and French available for you. You just need to go to your agenda, select your preferred language, and then you will be able to join the corresponding session. There's also closed captioning available to increase accessibility. We're very grateful to Amazon and Flex Optics, who are our event sponsors and bring interpretation and captioning to you today. This is a reminder to all of you, if I could take a chance to please request you to engage very enthusiastically with all of us, but respectfully and responsibly as well. Use the chat, please, for sharing any comments, any questions. You can do that in English, French, and Spanish. And you could please format your questions with your name and country first. So if you're Jane from Kenya, for example, please introduce yourself like that first. And then this session is being recorded. So if you're unable to catch all of it, there will be a recording that will be made available on the platform here afterwards. So with that, I think we'll jump into the Internet Way of Networking session. And Chris, could I request my slides now? Thanks. So, a question to all of you. What holds us together? In the last couple of years, at least, I can very confidently say it's the internet. We've used it to not only work and learn online, we've used it to come to each other's aid in times of trouble and crisis. We've used it to avail healthcare services. We've used it to keep in touch with loved ones, transact online, avail entertainment services online. So there's very little that we possibly cannot imagine doing on the internet today. And that has really made the internet a force that holds us together. Next slide, please. So one of the things that, we kind of tend to forget when we think about the internet, even though it's such a crucial resource in our lives, is that, while it empowers users to do absolutely fantastic things, right? What is it that has made the internet so successful? And the answer is to be found here at the Internet Way of Networking session. It is the unique fundamental properties of the internet that hold it up and that make it as amazing as it is. So the Internet Society has identified 5 critical properties that make the internet work for everyone. And these critical properties that we possibly don't even think about on a day-to-day basis are all under threat. And if they're threatened, then the internet that we know of, the internet that we use, is going to be under threat. And we all need to therefore come together to promote and defend the internet. Next slide, please. All right, so on your screen are the 5 critical properties of the internet way of networking. There may be other ways of networking, but we've identified the internet way of networking as upholding the ideal internet. And among those properties are accessible infrastructure with a common protocol. There's an open and interoperable architecture of the internet. There's a decentralized management of the internet and a distributed routing systems. There are common global identifiers. So, we all know where to go without really knowing exactly what the IP address, etc. is. And then finally, the fact that the internet is technology neutral. It is general purpose, and it is meant to hold up pretty much any activity that we choose to develop, innovate, and build on the internet. Next slide, please. So what the Internet Society did this year, after talking about the critical properties and presenting it to the rest of the world last year, is talk about the enablers of an open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy internet. Now, the internet in its present form, in its ideal form, is open, secure, trustworthy, and globally connected. And we've identified some of the enablers which are on the chart in front of you as things that ensure that the internet remains open and secure and trustworthy and globally connected. And among those are that the internet should have easy, unrestricted access, that there should be collaborative development management. There should be unrestricted use and deployment of technology on the internet. And the fact that, data should be confidential, along with like information services and applications. There should be integrity of information application services, and the internet should be reliable, resilient, available, accountable, and there should be privacy on the internet. Next slide, please. So think of the expanded Internet Way of Networking Toolkit, as we call it, as an environmental impact assessment, but for the internet. So one way of thinking about it is, if the government decided to build like a 12-lane highway, it would have to go through an environmental impact assessment to gauge just what sort of impact is going to have on the biodiversity in that area where construction is going to be happening. And the trade-off is going to be X, Y, and Z for that highway to come into existence. So very similarly, what we're requesting policymakers to do and our community to enable them to do that is analyze any policy consideration or development or decision or legislation for the internet through this toolkit. Use this assessment framework to see if what the stated objectives are through that policy, what their effects on the internet would look like. And therefore then, are the trade-offs worth it? Are the trade-offs to compromise on an open, interoperable internet worth the policy decisions that lawmakers are trying to make? Next slide, please. So where we need your help as the Internet Society community with all of your extremely crucial voices is to promote and defend the internet, right? The Internet Impact Assessment that we enable through this toolkit is helping people understand how policy decisions could harm the internet. And of course, protecting the internet's foundations will help it reach its full potential as a force for good. Something that we've been experiencing so much more in the last 2 years that we've lived through the pandemic. And then finally, the fact that we all benefit when we work for and towards an open, globally connected, secure, and trustworthy internet. So with that, I'd like to bring in Amrita. Amrita is one of the co-authors on a screening report, an impact brief that we recently conducted on an Indian policy decision. And I'd request Amrita to talk about how she used the expanded toolkit to assess the decisions that were made in India.
Thank you, Neeti, and hello, everyone. Could I have the slides, if that's possible? Thank you. So as Neeti mentioned, this is something which we wanted to see as to, we wanted to use the toolkit and see a particular policy from the Indian perspective, which has been launched in February of this year, but there is a lot of conversation happening. So we wanted to see using this toolkit as to, is it helping in promoting an open, globally connected, secured and trustworthy internet, which we all want and which the policy also wants actually. So, you may not be from India, but we are just sharing it as an example. You can use it in your own respective countries in the various policies which are being framed. Can we go to the next slide? Yes, so the policy which we are discussing is the Information Technology Act of 2021, which is known as the Indian Intermediary Guidelines or the Information Technology Guidelines, Intermediary Guidelines and Digital Media Ethics Code Rules 2021. The next slide. This is mostly for the intermediaries. So in India, we have all kinds of intermediaries. There are cyber cafes, there are social media companies. There was a lot of related to fake news and a lot of information coming in, and there is a particular aim to regulate the social media intermediaries, and that is when the guidelines were brought in. As I mentioned, it was brought in announced in February 2021, and it came into effect in May. This India has an Information Technology Act, and this is a part of that parent legislation. So the aim more, though it is for intermediaries, is more to regulate social media intermediaries, messaging services, media companies, digital media houses, and it also labels social media companies of a particular stature as significant social media companies like the Facebooks and the others who are in that category. And it also recasts what the intermediary liability protection or the safeguards, safe harbor which intermediaries are liable to get in India. The next slide. So there are various provisions in this, but the main provisions which we wanted to look at is the content takedown. So there, the guidelines particularly state that any content which is found objectionable, and obviously there are certain criteria given, it has to be taken down by social media companies or the intermediary within 36 hours. The one which is a bit crucial and tricky and is the rule 4.2, which says that you need to identify the first originator of information on an end-to-end encrypted messaging platform, which means if a particular message has been sent, you need to identify who was the first one who sent it. And if it had been sent originally overseas, the first person in India who starts to send it has to be found. Now this, if you are trying to break into an encryption, there is a concern. Of course, there are some legal this particular piece has been challenged in the court by WhatsApp and by various other civil society entities and media, but this is a very tricky, area. The other is it asks the intermediaries to automatically filter content. Now, the intent is to filter CSAM or terrorist or fake news, but obviously rules can be used in different ways. The rule 4.7, which asks social media companies to ask their users to voluntarily identify themselves. Now, it plays a bit with the anonymity. Interestingly, I would also like to say that when we are talking about Rule 4.2 of breaking, giving information on end-to-end encryption, the government clearly says that we do not want to break encryption. We do not want to see the messages, but we only want to know the originator. So while they say that, there are also concerns which are there, but these were the primary areas which we wanted to see and view if they fall and how it maintains the open, interoperable, secure, trusted internet. The next slide. So we wanted to look at the unrestricted reachability. So if we are talking about an open internet and we are talking about a particular platform having access to all kinds of information which you and I are sharing, does it actually help in, somehow stopping the information from being shared, or, is it allowing the particular governments or even companies to get a lot of information which was private? So we found that the particular rules are actually allowing the companies or even the government to have a lot of information which they actually do not need, and this is against basic the privacy and the human rights which we all enjoy. The next slide, please. So we wanted to see whether it is improving the reliability, resilience, and availability of the internet. So we found these were a bit challenged because if, for example, a conversation which is flowing from me to Neeti and someone wants to trace who has originated it, it is breaking in the trust. It is making the internet less reliable. If For example, someone is trying to read the conversation between Neeti and me for legitimate purposes. There can be bad actors who also can break in and look at that message. So it also undermines the resilience of the internet. It breaks. It makes it less secure. And when we are talking about content being filtered or content, proactively, it may lead to a lot of censorship or surveillance, which may actually hamper the availability of content to everyone. For example, today it may be for a genuine requirement, but tomorrow, if, for example, there is a particular community whose information wants to be read, wants to be seen, and they may not be able to get that particular information to see, it will lead to censorship, and it will actually hamper the open, interoperable internet which we want. So this is also an area where we found there were concerns. The next slide. So we looked at it from the accountability. Obviously, there was an issue because if the conversation, for example, if someone wants to trace the originator of a particular message, many messages would be looked at, and who is accountable for it? Are there the checks and balances to see that, even not be able to know that whether my account has been looked at or my information has been looked at. So there is a concern of accountability. For example, if you are allowing an intermediary to look at all the content which you are sending or sharing, or even pictures which are sharing, are they actually, if, for example, a picture is taken down on a particular ground that it is obscene, whereas it may not be obscene for many people. So is the intermediary also liable? A simple example, a picture of a breastfeeding woman in many countries may be taken as obscene. In some places it may be taken in a very natural way. Now if that picture is taken down, is it going to help in any way, or is it leading to censorship, and whom should I go out and make accountable? So those are certain questions which comes, and this is a challenge which we found. The next slide. And obviously, if you're talking about privacy, and it underlines the privacy, most of the particular rules which we are looking at, for example, if you're talking about automatic filter blocking of CSAM material, or taking down content of violence against women, while these are actually good, but this may actually lead to, infringing the privacy of people. For example, even traceability, as in if I am having some conversation going on an end-to-end encrypted platform, I may want confidentiality, but such acts of allowing traceability in encrypted devices actually threatens a user's privacy. So we found it lacking in that manner. The next slide, please. So, what we feel, and is that the internet assessments, such kind of internet assessments, will actually help you and me to know how a policy could harm the internet. As in, I'm not saying, there are various things which are being discussed. There are various parameters. You don't even have to look at all of them. And it is not mandatory for any government or anyone to use. I would say it's like a checklist, as in, if you want, you can look at it that, okay, this policy has been formed. Is it actually helping me? Is it actually helping to promote an open internet? Is it allowing information to flow as it should flow, so that we all enjoy the internet as we are enjoying today? Will it actually help you and me, and even people who are newly connecting to the internet, get to use the internet in the full way? Will it help small businesses run in a secure manner, or will, say, for example, getting access to encryption or encrypted data harm those, even a business to operate in a particular way? For example, many people do business over WhatsApp. Will it actually harm the business? Also to look at, once we look at these checklists and we look at it, can we help to, in our way, in a small way, to ensure the internet is open, globally connected. We can use it in a secure and trustworthy nature, because that is what we all want from the internet. So Neeti, I'll go back to you, and we can discuss the other things.
Thanks so much, Amrita. That was fantastic. I think this sort of like impact assessment, taking one sort of policy into question and then looking at it through the entire framework of, the critical properties first and then the enablers of a open, globally connected, secure, trustworthy internet is exactly the aim of the Internet Way of Networking Toolkit. But I also wanted to just gather your thoughts about, there are going to be people who find it difficult, for very many reasons, to maybe use the toolkit in its entirety, or to analyze every single policy decision through the lens of the toolkit. So, having used the toolkit from front to back yourself, what are the top recommendations, or what are your top thoughts on how people can use this toolkit, even if they don't have the time or the resources to use it in completion and produce an impact report like you did?
Sorry, I was muted. So I think, Neeti, you don't need to use it in a very detailed manner. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Internet Society has not made it only to be used by policymakers or researchers to look at it on entirety, but anyone, for example, if there is a new policy coming up in any of your countries, you can just look at it, not even go to the checklist. Think that, okay, if this is the policy, will it help to ensure the internet to be open? For example, if I am sending a message to someone, or even a woman is sending, is it safe? Is it secure? Is it making the internet, is this particular piece of legislation making the internet more trustworthy? Even if the intent is trustworthy, is it the end result going to make it more trusted, or is it going to erode the trust somewhere? Is my privacy going to be enshrined? Or if particular legislation is there, what are the checks and balances to see if my privacy is protected? Will it be making me more secured while using the internet? So these are certain questions, and I think, I'm sorry I don't have the chat, but there, if you go to the Internet Society website, they have a particular list, and it is very detailed. Don't be overwhelmed by it, but look at the questions. There are various sections, and look at the questions, and just in your mind think that this particular legislation, is this helping? Is it going to reduce the overall or increase overall level of internet's resilience to malfunctions? Look at how accountable it will be. Will it make it the internet more non-transparent, or will it encourage hidden actors? Will it if it is giving a particular government or say law enforcement certain rights, will bad actors be using it? So these are small questions we normally converse with. Those are just listed down in a particular way, and you can look at it. You need not look at the entire thing, just take up 2-3 things. And if you need help, Neeti, you are there, or others are there in Internet Society who can help out. Have a more detailed conversation, and you can reach out to people who have used it also to kind of ask them how to use it, or how you can do it. As in, it's very flexible, and it's not even that you have to use it. It's something which has been made. If you want to use it, it is great. So I would say you can cherry pick and choose what you want to see, and you can use it in the way you want.
Thanks, Amrita. I'm also wondering, in a context where we're seeing more and more attacks on the internet, right? We're seeing law enforcement agencies talk about backdoors, for example, to encrypted communication. We're seeing very often a change in the way that intermediary liability protection has been perceived for so long. And I'm wondering what all of this means, of course, for like service providers, firstly, but what it means for the user, what it means for small businesses, especially those that are built on top of these services, right? Very recently, I think an example that comes easily to mind and is extremely relevant is that there was an outage of this large social media company and all of its associated services, right? And in the days that followed that outage, it lasted a few hours, but in the days that followed that outage, it resulted in economic losses not just for that particular intermediary and its services, but it also meant that so many people couldn't get in touch with their family, couldn't transact, couldn't conduct business because they were built on top of these services. And in some cases, there were some services that were built to enable emergency support to, say, abuse survivors or people who were experiencing extreme distress. So when we try and fragment the internet, or how we call it in our circles, the splinter net, we've looked at a splintered view of the internet. It's no longer the big open global internet. I'm just wondering if I could get your thoughts on the splinter net, or like fragmentation of the internet that so many countries are trying to now enact.
So that's a very loaded question, Neeti, and it has a lot of questions in it. So I'll try to take one by one. Okay, I'll come to SplinterNet, but you first mentioned small businesses and encrypted platform. Yes, as in security is very much needed. For example, today, and pandemic has highlighted it more, even for children, for example, for whom we are saying, okay, we need to break encryption for CSAM, but these children are also studying online. If it's a trusted encrypted platform, many people cannot get into those platforms, and unless and until you share things, right, the passwords, etc., they will not be able to access, and you can keep them secure, their communication secure. Encryption is not just limited to big companies. Smaller companies, as you mentioned, are using it. For you and me to do banking, we need a trusted platform. If today you and I know that someone can look at it, we will not want to do our internet banking, right? We will then want to go to the bank and do. And I don't think any nation or any company wants that kind of load in their offices. So we need to look at the encryption issue, and like we were discussing in the other session earlier, that there are content related issues like hate speech, misinformation, terrorist content. They have to be dealt in a different way. These are social issues manifested with the help of technology. Of course, you can use technology to kind of curb them to a certain extent, but technology is not the only solution, and technology cannot solve these issues. So we need to be aware and try to divide issues. That's one thing. Now, intermediaries, when they started, were a different breed. Today, however, a big social media company is not merely an intermediary who is just allowing conversations to happen. They are because of the governments and also their policies, they're also looking at the content which is flowing in their pipes. They are also allowing you, because of advertisements, to see certain information, pushing you information which as an intermediary you cannot do. They are also publishers now. So governments also, and it is rightly so, they are looking at redefining the intermediaries, or what these social media big companies, big tech are doing. And they are also creating their own, I would say, silos. And as you mentioned, a particular company goes down, it hurts everyone, and that concerns everyone. Governments are also legitimate in their concerns, but whether they are, the particular thing which they are doing is going to address that issue is a concern. For example, will that particular rule, for example, looking at the first originator, help to resolve the issue? We have our doubts. There are other ways in which you can actually look at it. So there is some kind of a splinter net to some extent happening, not only because of companies who are huge, bigger than nations, who are trying to look at whom we are all using because we like their services and they give us a lot of service, but governments are also becoming concerned that their sovereign interests are not being protected. So they are trying to look at data localization. Whether that's a solution, I don't think so, but those are issues which are being looked at. And and those are harming the internet. So the conversations has to happen as to can there be mutually agreeable treaties through which these issues can be resolved, because MLATs need revision. Are the the jurisdiction issues which come out, can those be solved at a at a more global level, because everyone is not into the Budapest Convention or any other conventions. So there are gaps, those need to be addressed, and it has to happen at a global level. Closing your nation, or splintering the net, is not going to solve the issue, and the internet, which we all want and most governments also want, they will not get the benefit, which the internet is today giving a level playing field even to a developing country as much as it is to a developed country. Of course there are digital divides and there are technological divides, but still it is helping countries to leapfrog. But if we start closing it, we may lose those benefits. I hope I have been able to answer some parts of your question, Neeti.
No, absolutely you have. And I think even drawing attention to the fact that, there is a difference between the problems that are presented to us by a few actors that, we've already spoken about, and the larger internet. I mean, I think the problem arises where policymakers confuse a large actor for the internet. But the internet essentially is an infrastructure, right? It is the hardware as well as how all of that hardware interacts with one another that brings us, in a room like this where we're able to look at each other on a screen in real time and have this conversation like we're sitting in front of each other and be able to broadcast this to the rest of the world. So I think, Amrita, also taking from what you mentioned about, that technology may have a role to play, but then these are essentially social issues that, governments are trying to look for solutions. And very often what we hear from law enforcement agencies is that the only way they can do that is by tracking, monitoring, etc., people on the internet. Now, that's to me sounds very similar, like tracking and monitoring what you and I are doing in our day-to-day lives. So like if I'm sitting here as a private citizen, then I'm coming to more constitutional questions, but like as a private citizen, then does the government have the capability to install a camera and see what I'm doing in my own home? Because now our lives are so deeply intertwined with the internet. There's practically no aspect of our lives that are separate. So I think
Yeah, you
privacy.
muted. I lost you for a second.
Sorry. What I'm trying to get at is, this security versus privacy narrative and, how it's false. Our online versus offline lives, why are we more surveyed when it comes to our online lives? And I think these are the two questions that I'll stop at right now.
Yeah. So the security is always looked at as security versus privacy, but you cannot be secure if you cannot ensure privacy of every individual. So I would say these go hand in hand. For example, if you want a secure transaction for a businessman, it has to be private. I cannot be looking at, say, for example, you have a business and I'm looking at it. So they go hand in hand. I think we need to look at, and for governments trying to look at it as a security and privacy is primarily because internet is so rapidly growing, and the issues get manifested so fast. It takes a lot of time for everyone to understand how it is happening. Now, if so, what actually happens is, if you're not being able to look at it or understand or even control it, the best part is like, there is a leak, let's close the tap, rather than trying to seal the tap somewhere where you need to seal it. So it's something like that which is happening. I think there's a need for more capacity building, understanding of the issues. Law enforcement definitely has issues, they have legitimate issues, and when you speak to them you will find, like, for example, there is a CSAM issue and they want to take it down, they're not able to reach the legitimate platforms and get the help as soon as possible. So there can be other things which can be done. and it is a very genuine request they have. So, a woman is harassed, they want to take it down, they're not being able to take it down. So there has to be accountability at different level, whereas breaking the encryption may not solve it. There are process issues. There are perhaps more education issues or proactive, preemptive issues needed, not after an issue has happened. So that's one part of it. And the other question you had was, Neeti, the last part was?
I think the social, no,
social, yes.
the fact that social versus social problems versus how we're able to address it via technology. But I think you've already answered most of it through that. Amrita, I'm aware of time, so I think the last thing that I wanted to talk about, especially because you've spent so many years engaging in civic education and using different sorts of strategies and tactics and modes to educate several stakeholders and actors about what may concern them, or actively championing an open interoperable internet. When we take a toolkit like the Internet Society has produced on the Internet Way of Networking, we realize that it is an extremely crucial but easy to understand framework within which we can place an ideal internet, right? An open, globally connected, secure, trustworthy internet. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, how can civic education help not only our community, but also the sorts of networks and people and actors we work with, including policymakers, use this framework to think about their vision of the internet?
So I think this toolkit needs to be spread over. Many times when policymakers make, I'm talking about policymakers, then I'll talk about normal, people, you and me. So if you want to go to policymakers, etc., and try to, or governments to explain, or if you just show them that, look, this is how the toolkit is and this is where you stand, they will not like it. No one likes to see where you lag. Rather kind of having the conversation of, this is the toolkit, this is how you can use it, why don't you use it, and see when your next policies you're drafting or something, perhaps having the conversation in a different way, making it more easier for them to use, can help. And for genuine people like you and me, or even younger people who are coming in and are very interested in these issues, perhaps making it more simpler, or even showing them examples like this has been done in a more pictorial manner, or making small bits of information and sharing that. Have you ever looked at your policy and seen that, is it going to help you to to make it more safer for you, or breaking things down and sharing with them perhaps may help. As in, you need different strokes for different folk. There is a beautiful toolkit which has been made. It needs to be used, and there is no right answer. Something may work in some place, something may not work, but I think you have to speak the language which people like to speak and address the issues. If someone says that, look, this is the issue and this is what we are trying to address, and you will have to genuinely get down to the level to try to understand their issue and then try to give your rationale for it. If you negate someone's issue and say, no, this is not a genuine issue, even in an encryption discussion, if you say, no, that's an issue, but you can't break, you have to try to give alternatives to people. But I think it's a good mirror, I would say, the toolkit, to help people see where they are versus where they want to be. Because no nation or no legislation wants to do something wrong. They all want to do something right. And they have genuine interest for a sovereign has an interest for their people. But sometimes they overlook things, and I think this can help.
Thanks, Amrita. We have a question in the chat from David, who says, how can we address the society problem that don't have the broadband internet access at all? So I think first and foremost, I'd like to say, David, we are very, very fortunate and privileged to have internet access in the first place, because we realize that there is a genuine digital divide, that there are still people who haven't use the internet or do not get a chance to use the benefits that the internet has to offer. And that is one of the things that the Internet Society also focuses on. It's growing the internet, making sure that the internet reaches the ones who are furthest away. And one of the ways in which the Internet Society is doing that is by building community networks, where we sort of provide our capacity in like different ways to the communities that are interested in making sure that they have internet connectivity for themselves. These are small networks that can only benefit, like a small group of people, a community that sort of lives in a certain part of the world and may not have internet access. But the Internet Society therefore helps them sort of build that with, however we can help. But I'm wondering, Amrita, if you have any thoughts on those who don't have access yet.
Yeah, so coming back to, I'll just speak about the community networks which Neeti mentioned. So these are in far-flung areas where normally people don't want to go and set up the internet connectivity, and it empowers the community to run and sustain it, because just providing the internet is not the end of it, it is sustaining it. So they take ownership, they run it, and people join. So that's the beauty of community networks. Now, as Neeti mentioned, the pandemic has further increased the digital divide, and the gender divide is absolutely screwed. Governments are making efforts. For example, if I'm looking at India, there is a way in which various villages are being connected. There is a particular fund called NOFIN which is being pumped in there. There is a wireless system which is PM Biyani which has come in, wherein there would be shared Wi-Fi systems available for people in the villages. So there are measures being taken to connect people, and I think there has to be more private-public partnership, and civil society also has to be included, because just providing connectivity is not enough. People need meaningful connectivity. For example, what the COVID has actually taught is, low bandwidth is not going to help. Students cannot study. You need a particular amount of quality of bandwidth. So the availability, the accessibility, the price point, the quality, these are important. Thankfully, in India, the prices of internet is not so high, but there are countries in Asia Pacific and developing countries where the costs are very high. So it has to be looked at a holistic manner. People want to use internet, and the COVID has pushed people to use the internet. Similarly, capacity building in terms of safety is important. And those are certain things which many of the Internet Society initiatives also do, the Beyond the Net projects, etc. So those are important, allowing girls, for example, to learn internet. So there are challenges. Less than half of the world is still not connected. Everyone wants to connect. There's no sure shot answers, but everyone is trying to look at different options to connect. And incidentally, in India, the satellite, Elon Musk says that with satellites they will connect substantial amount of unconnected people. We need to see what happens. Hope we've been able to answer your question to some extent.
That was amazing. So I want to just say thank you before I wrap up the session. Thank you to Amrita for joining us this morning. And thank you for everyone, all of the voices from the community who joined, attended the session, have joined us to raise our voice in support of an open, globally connected, secure, trustworthy internet. I'd just like to remind you that there is a hashtag for social media, Community Week 21, where you can lend your support to our advocacy online. And thank you so much for taking out the time to join us at this session on the Internet Way of Networking, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Neeti, and thank you, everyone.